As I often do in the morning, reviewing kind of the end of the visible satellite imagery from yesterday across the U.S., particularly over the central southern plains here. And something caught my eye here, kind of North Texas, Oklahoma, portions of Kansas. I'll replay this in a second because what we saw at the end, right before that sunset line arced across, is these little fires here, some of which very well may be prescribed burns. Spring is kind of wildfire season down here in the plains. But even overnight, you can see some of these hot spots burning here and there, Arkansas, southeast Kansas. But then after that, after sunset overnight, do you see this like wall coming down across West Kansas? That's actually a cold front there being captured by some of that kind of shortwave, maybe infrared satellite overnight. It's cool to see that, both the wildfires there and then this cold front. See kind of this dust perhaps flying around here, and then it just gets pushed out of the way by that dominant cold front. Acts like the cold air is more dense. It kind of shoves everything out of the way. You can see it just climbing through Kansas and then down into Oklahoma. It's kind of neat to see that. But thinking about this, thinking at where we're headed in spring, some of the concerns that Eric voiced yesterday and that I have as well is starting to think about drought in the southern plains. Really starting to think about drought in a few areas across the U.S., at least as a early concern in 2026. Now, we're maybe not as widespread as we were in fall or even going back to like January and February of last year in 2025, but seeing some drought areas lingering through winter is always a concern, especially going into that like spring soil moisture. And across the southeast, see some significant drought classifications. Those kind of hop and bounce into the southern plains. Then we still have areas of the Midwest through Indiana, portions of Ohio, Illinois that have overwintered drought, and a number of prior winters right through central Indiana into central Illinois, where folks are hauling water in a time of year that's not usually happening. So keeping an eye on some of this overwinter drought. Now, the area that we were just kind of focused on in the middle part of the country was right here. Now, this is an area that is prone to drought, especially in spring. I mentioned that wildfire season. And if I jump over and show you the last 14 days of precipitation, there has been systems moving through. Obviously, we had the ice storm and the snow through the Ohio River Valley. But if you subtract that out of the equation, I mean, you can really draw a line from California through Texas, the southeast, even up into the mid-Atlantic, where we've seen this lack of precipitation, at least consistent precipitation this winter. And we need to keep an eye on this. If you think about the high temperatures here today, just like yesterday, where we had near record warmth in the southern plains, or showing you those smoke plumes coming out of Oklahoma, we have more warmth today. Now, the good news is a few of these areas still have some snow to melt into the soil. It's kind of doing that in, I think, a nice way here, getting some of that into the actual profile. But largely across the middle part of the country, starting to increase those evaporation rates on top of the soil. We just look at over the next week across the southern plains, you're getting up near an inch in parts of Texas and Oklahoma. It's not drastically high, but as we get further into February, as we get further into March, the sun's going to stay up longer. Those temperatures are going to increase like we're seeing here in mid-February, and we're going to start evaporating more of that moisture. And we don't have a lot of it that we've retained, apparently, over winter with that lack of precipitation. So just something to keep an eye on here early in the season. I bring this up because I heard it yesterday from Eric, time again, looking at these analogs, whether it's 18, whether it's 2009, 2014, we saw this kind of consistent southern or central plains drought signal. And some of these more recent analogs with this kind of weak fading La Nina in the central tropical Pacific, by and large kind of heading over towards some sort of weak El Nino in the summer. Like a lot of these forecasts suggest. Eric showed you the consensus, all the ensemble members showing some form of El Nino. Now, I'll pump the brakes on that slightly. It's often during this kind of spring predictability window when some of those INSO forecasts, end up rearranging quite a bit. So the fact that every ECNWF ensemble model shows El Nino still doesn't give me, maximum confidence that that is what's going to develop, that evolution this spring. I still give the chance. I'm close to where the Climate Prediction Center is, at least 50 to 60% chance of developing maybe by June or July, but it's far away from a sure thing. But it is part of our benchmark right now, something we have to keep an eye on. Another big story that we've been watching is the undergoing pattern change across North America as well. So often we've seen this spring, I should say this winter, of ridges here rather than troughs. But if we look here at the jet stream this morning, now starting to replace some of those ridging with troughs over the western U.S., kind of positioned right off the coast of California. You can see a little shortwave trough here. It's going to be a weather maker this week in California, another one behind that, which I think will be more significant. And then across the eastern U.S., we're not quite into that ridging, so to speak, yet, but you can start to see it taking some shape here with more of a ridge look than, troughing and cold air kind of locked into either the Midwest, New England, or the Mid-Atlantic. want to jump over and look at the surface winds. I'm kind of focused just west of California here. Two things I'm noticing, obviously just that compact low west of San Francisco, some light showers getting into portions of Southern California now. Those are going to increase, I think, over the next 24 to 48 hours. Another system behind that we'll have to talk about this weekend. But I'm actually looking over, I went to flip over to look at this closer in California, but you can see some nice convergence in the wind field there. There's that cold front diving from the north that we saw on that infrared satellite imagery. Coming down, area of convergence here across west central Texas, kind of the hill country. If I jump over and look at the radar this morning, some nice rain showers there, both over southeastern Oklahoma, a little bit weaker there, but certainly through South Texas. So in spring, drought is often kind of a lingering concern for the southern plains. We just discussed that, but it's also in spring where you can get these big pattern changes, similar to what we're seeing now, and start to bring some rain in. So it's hard to sit here, in February. We can benchmark some of these drought concerns. We obviously want to remove some of those drought classifications heading into the new year, but there's just a lot of kind of spring predictability concerns with the long-range weather pattern. It happens every year. It's why I'm somewhat skeptical, at least maybe relatively so, of El Nino until we get through March, April, and May, and we really see where those ocean temperatures are going and how the atmosphere is responding. Elsewhere across the country, across the Northeast, you can see some snow showers here lingering across New York and Pennsylvania. Some accumulations possible out of those, not too significant, but we do have weather advisories across New York, portions of Connecticut up into western Massachusetts. Those light showers just barely visible, Southern California, and mention those across the southern plains as well. I'll jump over and show you the ECMWF precipitation forecast. Kind of make this valid about lunchtime today. You can see those snow showers across Ontario, over to Quebec, into New York, southwest Texas. Not too strong there. There's our compact low just off the coast of San Francisco, making something of a near landfall, if you will, late tonight. This is around midnight. Some gusty winds moving into the Bay Area. Rain spreading across much of the San Joaquin, or at least portions of the Sacramento Valley as well, through Southern California, and then the snow finally beginning in the Central Sierras, more so like a Central and Northern Sierras event. And then tonight, some of those showers spreading across that front there, across the Mid-South and through Tennessee, Kentucky. Not too strong, but right along that front that we identified overnight in that visible satellite imagery that continues into the morning, both California and the Southeast with respect to precipitation. You can see some snow showers still lingering across the far Northeast. We're going to have this pair of rainmakers that we'll be watching through the middle part of this week. I'll take this forecast further out into Thursday. It's kind of interesting as we've seen this pattern change. The models get a better handle on it. I'm starting to see some amplification out west, with deeper lows kind of moving in like this, and they're not as progressive across the middle part of the country. Even this one that we just saw here over the next 24 hours that I quickly, it's not like this developed into a deep, coherent low with this big backside snow threat. This obviously doesn't look like it's going to produce as much rain. We'll take a look at that in a second. And if I take this forecast forward, we had that low here across California, but it struggled to kind of get out into the Central Plains here later this week. Finally, we see it cut across the Four Corners region. We have a better compact low now over South Texas, East Texas on Saturday evening. Could have a severe threat out of this. The GFS advertising some of that. The ECMWF has some instability for thunderstorms. The Gulf's been recovering from that huge Arctic air shot that went through Cuba with their record lowest temperature there. So the Gulf has to recover that moisture that's been kind of carved out of it further toward the south, and it's starting to do that to allow some instability back up into the southeast. As this tracks across on Sunday, I'll take it all the way to Sunday evening, and you can see maybe another kind of very local severe threat. Florida Panhandle, South Georgia, another one on Saturday evening, maybe in this corridor here. So it's been a while since we've talked about severe weather. Again, you're just kind of reaching the threshold of instability where you start to get some chance for severe thunderstorms. We'll see if the wind field works out, but something to keep an eye on that we haven't talked about in a while. Otherwise, later in the weekend, there's that next low coming into California. This one may be even more potent. You can see down to about 990 millibars, again, just west of San Francisco, spreading precipitation across the state late Sunday into Monday morning. Snow again for the Sierras. You can see rain forecast from southwest Oregon through San Diego. This one a much deeper, more potent low for, I think, the west broadly. You can see Oregon, Washington, Nevada, getting on some of that precipitation. Another low way off the east coast spinning up, but off coast. That's kind of a common pattern that we've seen here in the latter part of winter. At this point in the forecast, all the way out to next Tuesday, getting to about a week out, and can still see much deeper trough out west. This is kind of what I mentioned just a slide ago, where we've seen this kind of amplification out west and a lack of these storms, getting further out into the continental U.S. and wrapping up into a more significant system. I mentioned the kind of tandem weekend severe threat, but rather local down here. I mean, a nice healthy shot of rain to an area that needs it. We just went through that, but no deep kind of backside, snow threat. Not one of these, broad-reaching, highly impactful lows for the eastern U.S. This is more of an impactful setup, I think, for the western U.S. You're seeing that Sunday through Monday into Tuesday. Extremely heavy snow now for the Sierras. Rain continuing for the central coast of California. Might have to start thinking about some flooding into the Central Valley. And then heavy snow for the Sierras now getting up into Idaho. Still raining through Southern California. I mean, we started kind of that more intense activity Sunday night, taking this forecast out through Thursday. I know we're getting way out in the forecast here, 7, 8, 9 days, but not a big break for California, Southern California with rain, even portions of Southern Oregon, now getting into Nevada, Idaho with some snow. And this is an impressive event for the western U.S. Now we get all the way out to the end of the forecast, the 19th. You can see a sub, maybe 990 low trying to develop over the central plains, but even that's lacking, strong moisture component. I don't want to talk about this low too specifically because we're so far out, but it is likely, given the strength of that pattern out west, that we'll be looking at the early part to middle part of next week, that we will have maybe a more significant low to talk about in the middle part of the country. Now, what you just saw there, at least with respect to that western precipitation, was a lot of snow through California into Nevada, and then later kind of in the forecast period out into next week into Idaho. Some areas that kind of missed out, portions of the Cascades in Oregon and Washington, they will get some snow out of this pattern flip, but not quite as much as some other areas, northern Arizona, western Colorado. Again, some here, but not maybe as much as they could get out of your general west pattern flip. Really, it's the Sierras stealing the show here. Very high amounts. You can talk 2-3 feet plus. Potentially wouldn't shock me if we get to 4, given how strong some of these forecasts look. And the only kind of bad news there, it's great news for the Sierras. They can do this late in the water year like this. We've seen that time and time again, even this decade. But if I do kind of nitpick the western U.S. precipitation, technically speaking, Idaho, bedded up here, and the Sierras are closer to average. They've kind of lucked out enough across the water year to not end up as kind of a worse shape as maybe where we're at in Oregon, or where we're at in Washington, even through the southern Colorado kind of basin here. So unfortunately, the areas that really desperately needed kind of an improvement in the snowpack, missing out a little bit here, save for Nevada, some of those basins there across kind of a basin and range area, well below average, that are going to see a big bump, I think, from this pattern change. But would have liked to see maybe a little bit more widespread snowfall, at least up through the northwest. We're going to have to kind of keep an eye on them this summer, because I don't see a huge pattern change right now to bring them a lot more snow. But we'll see. March can do it late in the year, and we'll have to kind of root for that again this year. This is finally though, I mean, if you're in the Sierras, this is the map that we were hoping for, the kind of pretty colors on the risk of heavy snow map from the Climate Prediction Center. This takes us from the 17th to the 23rd of February, and you have that kind of critical high risk between the 17th and 18th for significant snowfall across that area. You can see the 17th to the 20th, right? That's when we took this out 10 days in the forecast, and we started to see that low develop. So getting better chances across the northern plains, upper Midwest for some snow later into that third week of February. And that's good, because this is an area too where we've seen a lack of snowpack this year. We're kind of focused on the west mountain ranges just a second ago. For the northern plains, portions of the far western, maybe like upper Midwest, running snow deficits, with just so many kind of clippers spitting up more so into the Midwest and New England this year. If we sum this up over the 10-day precipitation anomalies from the ECMWF, there's that kind of hole, if you will, over Oregon, over Washington. Switching east to the Continental Divide, you can see better upper Midwest precipitation into the Canadian Prairie as snowfall. Southern plains through the southeast, we saw those systems move through there, that kind of 2-day severe threat, likely wet through this entire corridor here. Now kind of looks like Louisiana, Mississippi, relatively dry, but I think this whole corridor here south of Tennessee and Little Rock will be on the wetter side as we go through this week into early next. Temperature-wise, as we go through the pattern, if you look left to right across the kind of 5-day segments here, warm across the middle U.S., stretching into the eastern U.S. as we get out into that day 5 through 10. So even starting to get out into next week, we finally give New England, the mid-Atlantic, a break from those very cold temperatures they've been dealing with. If you look further out, I'm looking all the way at the day 10 through 15, the west is getting colder by each segment as that deeper amplified trough settles in over California, obviously bringing that heavy snow, the rain threat, potentially flooding, some wind that we'll have to be keeping an eye on. But we're also seeing a reloading of the sort of cold air pattern. What I mean by that, particularly the AFS, which tends to be more amplified as a kind of a single operational run. But look at the cold stretching back into the Canadian prairie. You can almost see it, like it starts here up near the Arctic, even north of Alaska. Throughout the next 5 days, each of these forecasts starts to get more into the Canadian prairie, and then by day 10 through 15, just about all these models, we've reloaded that deep Arctic cold, which you can certainly still have in the middle to latter part of February. And it's just sitting there. It would take a slight pattern change to launch this through the Midwest yet again. And it just so happens, if we look up at the strength of the polar vortex here, out into the forecast, that's in orange. Kind of going back in purple and red, that's what's been analyzed and observed this year in 25 into 26. And we're seeing one of these kind of weakenings, the split in the polar vortex now forecast, certainly from the GFS over the stratosphere. And when those occur, we can sometimes see that increase in that potential for Arctic air outbreaks. Eric mentioned this yesterday. We're seeing it a little bit in the long-range ECMWF forecast, at least for the Midwest and New England. Again, unfortunately, hate to kind of re-include them in the Arctic air risk. And then the latest NMME forecast for March. I was keeping an eye on this morning, that it has that similar area of colder air kind of sweeping through, just like we theorized, maybe far into February, early part of March, for a turn to winter for this corridor here. Warmer across the southern plains, maybe the far western plains and the divide, maybe flipping that pattern back around to something a little bit more familiar, unfortunately, that we've seen this winter. Also just wanted to show you the temperature, then precipitation from the NMME, drier flipping back for California. Despite the wet in the early part of this kind of February forecast, NMME flips over back dry for that area. Some dry concern there for the southern plains and the southeast, two areas where drought is overwintered right now. Now, those areas are going to get precipitation right now, but we're also increasing that PET and that evapotranspiration rate. So a fight here heading into spring, but certainly keeping an eye on these areas going forward, despite some of the rain here this week. I want to jump down and look at South America quickly here. While we've seen some kind of favorable precipitation trends, we're going back a little bit drier here later in the forecast for like Mato Grosso, Minas Gerais, kind of the central part of Brazil. You start to get up into here, kind of circle the areas I'm talking about. These are your more like bigger ice states, especially for South America. So portions of South America, growing regions going over wetter here. These are the areas for southern Brazil, Uruguay, northern Argentina that had been drier through kind of the heart of summer, the austral summer down there. So going over wetter there, good news for those regions. But even for like central Brazil, you're in the middle of the harvest for soybeans, planting for corn. And I think this is just going to allow them to continue that pace pretty quickly here. Ahead on soybean harvest with the latest data here, and corn harvest, despite lagging a little bit, I think particularly in central Brazil, with that lack of precipitation allowing this corn to get into the ground faster for their second corn crop season is maybe not necessarily bad news for them. So again, if you're looking for the weather story in a positive light for price pressure out of South America, it's just not there right now. We'll have to kind of see where we go. Looking at northern Argentina, southern Brazil, and then Uruguay further out, some lingering drought concern is likely to exist here as we get further out into March and April through kind of, you think of their more significant corn months where heat could play a concern, but at least right now the precipitation kind of being pretty timely for their busiest part of the year. I think that's my last slide here today. Thanks for watching, and Eric will talk with you all on Wednesday.